Okay, let's take a look at the rhythm part for the Texas Shuffle. This is a 12-bar blues in the key of E with a 2-5, which means bars 9 and 10 go from the 2-7, which in this case is an F-sharp 7 chord, to the 5-7, which is a B7 chord in this case. We actually do a walking bass line that outlines those changes. But starting out on bar 1, we have here is a pretty simple Boogie Woogie melody that we apply over the 1 chord and the 4 chord. The Skeletal Framework is. Another alteration of that would be a 2-bar version, where instead of just going 1, flat 3 and 3, 5 and 6, you're actually going to include the flat 7 to create a descending line, which is pretty straightforward. You can do that also over the A chord, or now you notice what's happening here is on some of those notes I'm actually including a few extra notes rather than just doing a single note line. I'm not being extremely particular. Sometimes I'm getting a root and then 2 notes like the root and the 5th on top. Same thing over the A chord. Other times I might be getting the root and the 5th, a standard power chord, and then just a single bass note. You can refer to the tablature for specific phrasing. But what's also happening is on top of that, you can create a cool little harmony line just by including 2 strings. So over the E chord, rather than just playing your 5, your 6, and your flat 7, you can include that root on this string. And what that sounds like in context is kind of gives a nice little spin on something that's a pretty typical guitar move. As you go through bars 4 through 8, you'll see that we're just doing the same thing over the 1 and the 4 chords, just with some different phrasing. Now when we get to bar 9, we have the walk-up from the 2 to the 5 chord that I mentioned. Okay, at measures 9 and 10, we're going to outline the change from F-sharp 7 to B7. The way we're going to do this is using a simple melody that goes from the root, 2nd, flat 3rd, and major 3rd of F-sharp, and then the root, 2nd, flat 3rd, and major 3rd of the B7 chord. Again, that is. But what's going to happen is we're actually going to do this in octave, so you get. And that puts us right in position for measure 11, which puts us back at our 1 chord, which is an E7. And in this case, I'm playing the root, and then the tritone above the top, which is the 3rd and the flat 7. And then we just play a little walking bass line that brings us back down to our 5 chord. And then at this point, our 5 chord, B7. This brings us into chorus 2. Nothing different in the first 4 measures. Measure 17. Now right there in measure 19, I do a slight deviation from the pattern as we've seen it up into this point. Instead of just staying on the lower strings and playing my rhythm, I'm actually throwing it in a small upstroke, just grabbing the top 2 strings. Just a nice way to kind of let those notes ring out, gives you a little bit of a fuller sound. Again, measures 21 and 22, we have the same walk-up that we encountered the first time. Again, targeting this E7 and then walking back down to our B7. And that brings us to chorus 3, which introduces a quick change. What that means is measure 2 of chorus 3, which is measure number 26, is an A7 chord, the 4 chord. Just breaks up the harmony a little bit. Red and I were just jamming, so we didn't really decide beforehand if we were going to do a quick change or not. And this just kind of illustrates that sometimes in a jam context you can take liberties with the progression or the way you play, and a lot of times it'll pull something creative out of the person you're playing with. So looking at chorus 3, when we take a look at the first measure, we have our basic E chord, just an E power chord. Then we're going to walk a bass line up. But the fingering here is going to be important. Rather than keeping my fingering logical, which would be first, second, and third fingers, I'm actually going to slide my second finger. The reason for that is on beat 1 of measure 26, we have this voicing, which is an A note, and then the tritone of A. This is a flat 7 and a 3. This is what's called a shell voicing, Without delving into that too far, these are really useful voicings that you'll find for playing in large band contexts, because it really states the sound of an A7 chord without getting too cluttered, like a big A7 like that. So anyways, you have that little 3-note structure. But what's happening is we're actually going to play it with our second, a third, and our fourth fingers. So it'll take you a little while to get that, but practice that move. At that point, we're right in position to grab a little walking bass line that brings us back to our E chord. What we've done is we've gone from an E7 to an A7, and we're walking back to an E7, walking back down to the A. Now actually, I'm just kind of going with the flow there. I didn't do that in that position. On the notation, you'll see that I actually did that in open position. So we're back to pretty much the standard line that we started with. Measured 30, has another one of those little upstrokes, and then of course we're going to finish the tune off with the same turnaround we've used up until this point. There's a small little cadenza for the guitar player to play, and we just finish off by stating our 1 chord. Here's a small tip regarding your right hand while playing this Texas shuffle rhythm. Often on slower tempo shuffles, I will tend to play all downstrokes. Even getting up into medium shuffles. In fact, unless the song calls for it, I would say I'd strive for all downstrokes unless the tempo doesn't allow it, which we'll see that on our fast shuffle. However, with this Texas shuffle, I vary from that usual rule, I guess you'd call it, and I actually do alternate pick. And the reason for that is it seems to be easier and smoother for me to keep that swinging 8th note feel, as opposed to, which if you were to apply that type of picking while playing this line, it would come out sounding very stiff. I'm doing alternate picking. And sometimes the upstrokes are just a little bit lazy. That's something that you want to listen to some recordings to really pick up the subtle articulations. Different artists will do things in different ways. But just a little note there, if you're trying to go, you're probably not going to get the same type of results or success rate if you go with the alternate picking. It's kind of a more legato sound, whereas the all downstrokes is a more staccato sound, and it especially will help when you're playing in a small ensemble or a duo format like Red and I were for this example. You can refer to the tablature for specific fingering, but just keep a basic alternating pattern throughout the rhythm, and you'll find that the groove comes to you a little bit more easily.